Welcome to the weekly Underrepresented in Tech vlog with Michelle Frechette and Allie Nimmons. Underrepresented in Tech is a free database built with the goal of helping people find new opportunities in WordPress and tech overall. Let's dive in with this week's vlog.
Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
How are you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for jumping in today. Allie had a last minute conflict and you were available. I happen to know this because we work together. So I really appreciate your flexibility in joining me on today's episode of the Underrepresented in Tech vlog. And you are an underrepresented person, but you're also the first man who's joined me on our vlog. So congratulations on bridging that gap.
That's a big honor.
So I don't know if you saw the episode last week, but Allie and I talked about writing a resume and what things you should do to maybe boost your resume, things that you don't want to do necessarily. And as underrepresented folks, especially people who are in the BIPOC community, it can be off-putting to some people to think about like whitewashing your resume, things like that. We talked about that last week, but the fact that somebody whose name is Jose, for example, might not be taken as seriously as somebody whose name is Jeff. So, and I know, and well, you have a background with people from, all over Latin America, right? And
Yes.
Hispanic background. I know your family's from Puerto Rico. And so we have talked about some of that in the past just between us. Clearly I hired you. So it was, your kudos spoke for themselves. Your resume spoke for itself. And, it had nothing to do with whether your name was Jeff or Jose or Beatrice or anything else. But what we wanted to talk about this week, kind of following up on the whole resume thing, was talking about interviewing and some interview tips that we might give to people who are, who got that interview and they're getting ready to prepare for it. And I've interviewed so many people over my career, and I've been interviewed in my career as well. And so it's interesting. Of course, I bring the woman's perspective to it, and I think it's an interesting thing to sit in a interview and feel challenged about your resume, nervous as heck. I don't know about you, but like anytime I've ever applied for a job, like even if I feel 100% confident about myself and my abilities, butterflies in my stomach.
Yeah, the nerves definitely kick in the day of the interview.
Right? Do you have any tips for like how to squelch the nerves, or is there like, do you pep talk yourself, or like no coffee, extra coffee? Like, is there anything that you do to prep for an interview?
Well, I definitely practice the night before. It also helps to practice with friends. Maybe practice in front of a mirror, record yourself. All those kind of things kind of prep you to create memories that even when you have nerves during the interview, those memories kind of kick in naturally, and that's what I feel saves me.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, the more practice you can feel about it, the more you're able to just kind of talk naturally about your work experiences, the better off you are. Now, I've made some mistakes in my past life in an interview that I know probably cost me a job. Like, I thought at one point in time, like to say, because women especially, like people look at us, they're like, well, is she going to have children? Is she going to be out on maternity leave? Like, right? And they start to evaluate that way. So like I was, when I was in my 30s or something, and I already had like a teenager, and I was like, oh, and I'm not having any more kids, so don't even worry about that. And then I thought afterwards, that was dumb. I shouldn't have said anything. Have you ever done anything in an interview where you left and thought, yep, not going to get that job?
Um, not that I can, not that I can think of. I have left interviews thinking, wow, I should have said this, I should have said that. But what I do remember, um, as it relates to underrepresented in tech, there's been interviews where the interviewer has asked me personal questions
Oh,
that,
like what?
like for example, where are your parents from? Like trying to basically find out my background, because like you said, my name doesn't really give off that I'm Latino. Even my last name, to be honest, Betancourt, the way it's pronounced in English, It doesn't give off that I'm Latino either, unless you were to say it in Spanish, Betancourt, then you'd be like, okay, he's. But yeah, they'll ask questions like that, like where are your parents from? Personal questions that are actually illegal. And I've left the interview thinking I should have said something, but I was younger back then, so and the nerves kicked in. And it's like those kind of questions make a person who's underrepresented feel so uncomfortable. You feel like you're being judged based on your past, your ethnicity, your race, stuff like that. So those are the kind of things that I would say to any company to make sure that their employees aren't doing that. Because usually when you're getting interviewed, right, you're getting interviewed by a department manager or even a director, and it's not like they're part of the HR department, so they may bend those rules that could really like defeat the purpose of trying to hire diverse people.
Yeah, because hiring for diversity is a big topic now. We've talked about that before. You and I have talked about that. You've heard us talk about it with underrepresented tech for sure. And then we also talk about like the idea of tokenization. And it's like, if you walk, let me ask you, so if you walk into a place to interview and you look around and everybody's like white and there's only a couple women, do you feel like, yep, I'm in here as the token interview? Or like, what kind of experiences have you had? Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you feel like you might not fit in? Do you feel challenged at all? Or are you, I mean, I think you are, you know, and who you are, you're confident in your abilities, but that doesn't mean that you don't have feelings when you walk into a place like that. So what are your experiences that way?
So you bring up a lot of good points and you're making me go back and remember so many memories. Like you said, now in life I am more used to it, but just remembering when I was younger, going to interviews, for anyone, right? Anyone, depending what culture you come from, or not, it doesn't even matter what culture you come from. When you go into a room and you're the only one from that background, that can add to the intimidation. You're wondering that if you're being hired as a token, or you're just looking around, you want to see someone familiar that you can relate to. So that definitely is not easy. It definitely is a culture shock, but um, yeah, that's another challenge that you have to face.
So one of the things you said is that somebody would maybe ask you, so where are your parents from? Like trying to kind of figure out like what your background is. And you said it, you wish you'd said something in the past. What would your advice be to somebody who might face that question today? Like how would you respond to that question differently than you did in the past?
I definitely would respond by saying, I, that question is not a legal question to ask during an interview. Like, I would check them, but not in a disrespectful way, but I would,
Mm-hmm.
take a firm stance and let them know that it's not okay to do that.
Yeah.
You may not get the job, right? You may risk losing the job, and that's fine. Do you really want to work for someone who's asking you those kind of questions? But at the same time, you're helping future interviewees because that you're
Mm-hmm.
correcting that person that's not okay to ask those kind of questions, to behave that way during the interview.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. If somebody said to you, okay, let me rewind a sec. If you're applying for a job and nowhere on the job does it say that you have to speak Spanish or that you have to be bilingual or bring any of that, has anybody ever asked you in an interview like, oh, do you speak Spanish? And how do you respond to that? And does it feel inappropriate?
Well, culturally to me it doesn't, because like especially from a Puerto Rican background, we kind of enjoy saying that we speak Spanish. It doesn't feel inappropriate, but then again, it all depends how the question is worded, right? If you just say, "Do you speak Spanish?" and you're being polite about it, I'm fine with it. But another thing that did happen to me during the interview was something very similar to that. It was actually the same interview. And the funny part is that the interviewee was director of the director of I'm trying to think what it was. It was social worker department. She was director of the social worker department, and she basically said that she spent time in Ecuador, and she asked me, "Are you Puerto Rican?" And I'm like, "Yes." Why? And she was like, "Oh, because I can tell because Puerto Ricans cut their words in Spanish." And I'm like, "Wow."
That sounds really racist.
Yeah. So
Yeah, judging somebody based on their entire ethnicity or
So in that case,
wow.
blatantly like just wrong. Like in that case, I didn't feel good that someone, recognized my culture or said something about me speaking Spanish.
Right. Instead of saying like, oh my gosh, I visited Santo Domingo and if you were Dominican, or I visited, San Juan and I loved it. That's different than like, oh yeah, I could tell cut your words off kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. So, what are your feelings when you are in an interview and somebody does say things like that? Are you at that point like, I don't even want this job? Are you still hoping you get the job? Like, have you ever withdrawn your application afterwards because you're like, I don't even want to work there?
Well, definitely after that interview, I did withdraw my application. During the interview, I felt more nervous by those questions and more confused. So I was still trying to get through the interview um, at that time. Now I would definitely walk away. It's not worth it. But yeah, when you're actually in the moment, and especially if you don't have too much experience interviewing, um, and you're new to the whole corporate world or any type of field, you're gonna stick through it because you're thinking, I want a job, I need a job. Let me just kind of answer these questions. Um, but yeah, it doesn't help at all with your emotions, with the whole atmosphere,
I can't even imagine, for sure. Absolutely. So, one of the things, and you might remember when I interviewed you, I'm going to switch over to like talking about some topics and questions and things. I think there's standard questions that people ask in interviews. So, why do you want to work here? Like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Like, all those kinds of questions. One of the questions that I ask, there's two questions that I ask that I think when I interview people, people always say, wow, nobody's ever asked me that before. One is, how do you like to be appreciated other than salary and monetary, right? Because I like to get feedback and find out what are people's values about how they like to be appreciated. So like, for example, like not just because I'm like judging you on your answer, but like if I hire you, I want to know how to manage you as somebody in my team by being able to recognize your accomplishments in ways that are meaningful to you.
That was a great question. When you asked me that question, I had never heard it, like you said, in my interviewing experience. And it's so much better to ask someone that kind of question versus a similar question as like, what animal would you describe yourself as? A company asked me that once. And I got what they were
What did
trying
you
to do.
say? What was your answer?
I think I said a monkey because they think of, it's funny to say monkey, right? But I said something along the lines because they're able to think of ways to use tools to solve problems. And that just came.
Ooh, good answer.
And he was impressed, but at the same time, what a weird question, right? But when you say
Exactly.
appreciated, uh, that's such a great question because the employee gets to tell you, or the prospective employee gets to tell you, what kind of things help them to do well at the job, and that also helps you to see if they're a good fit for the company culture. And that was a
Yeah,
great question.
absolutely. Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. My other favorite question I like to ask is at the end, I'll say, is there any question I didn't ask that you wanted to be able to answer? Like, as in, tell me something that I didn't ask you about that you really would like me to know about you, right? And so I think that most managers, hiring managers, don't ask that question. They get to the end of their questions and they've got their answers and they move on. And sometimes I've left interviews going, I wish I'd had an opportunity to say XYZ about myself, or explain a gap in my resume, or explain what a specific job was, or software that I'd used, or something like that. Or that I was an EMT and I have some medical experience, but it doesn't really fit in my functional resume or whatever. And so I wanted to kind of give some advice to people out there. If you are being interviewed and that you're getting towards the end of the interview and they haven't given you an opportunity to say those kinds of things, it's perfectly okay for you to interject things at the end, because usually they'll say, do you have any questions for me? And that's your opportunity, not just to ask questions, which of course you should already have formulated some questions. Never ask what's the salary, never ask when are you trying to hire by. Those are things that are, typical questions. Ask questions about the company culture. Ask questions about, did they enjoy working there? What would other people that the work there say about their experiences there? Those kinds of questions, because salary benefits, those are questions that if they offer you the job, you can get those answers then and make a determination of whether or not you want to take the job. But getting questions about the company culture, then you're going to find out if you really want to work there and the fit. But take that opportunity at that point to say, if they say, do you have any other questions? Ask a couple questions and then say, but I also wanted to mention this about myself. I also wanted to be able to tell you X, Y, Z, because you might have thought they were going to ask. Since they didn't, and you've been sitting with this like gem in your pocket, you're dying to tell them this amazing fact about yourself. Take the opportunity to make sure you say those things. And then always, always, always follow up. We used to follow up. I always say this is going to tell my age. We used to follow up with handwritten thank you notes. And you can still do that, but sometimes by the time you've written a thank you note, got it to the post office delivers it to that person, their mailroom or whatever delivers it, that decision might have already been made. So follow up immediately with an email. You can always follow up with a handwritten thank you note afterwards, but always follow up with an email. And you can take the opportunity in those emails to say those things that you might have thought of afterwards that you wished you'd said.
Right. Yeah, it's so important. Like, as you mentioned before, and you asked me if you ever left the interview regretting something, right? So giving out that advice to let out those final stories that you wanted to tell them can help to do that, to not have no regrets on the interview. That's another important thing too. I've learned when it comes to interviewing, even if you come from a culture where you're not used to talking about yourself or bragging, in the interview you're supposed to do that. So you should really focus on telling those stories. So practice telling stories about your experiences. And that's one of the best things to do in order to get a job.
Yeah, so if you have that gem sitting in your pocket, that thing you're dying to tell them about, find a way to work it into some of the other questions if you don't feel comfortable waiting till the end. Because it's not like at the end there's this big ta-da, right? You want to impress them throughout the whole thing, not like mundane. Michelle's okay, she's okay, she's like, oh, look at that. I want to wow them from the start, right? So you definitely want to that's really good advice, to make sure that you've got all that stuff in there and that you have the practice in telling it, so it isn't just like a last minute thought. I think that's great. For sure. Any other pieces of advice before we sign off on this vlog for today?
Definitely practice beforehand, be confident, and don't let people ask you questions that they shouldn't ask.
Yeah, that's good. And I think, with
the laws and your rights as an interviewee. Yeah. And
it's okay to get up and walk out of an interview if you're uncomfortable, or you decided right then and there, this is not a place I want to work. You can stop the interview and say, I appreciate the time today, but I've already determined this is not a good fit for me, and I'm gonna stop wasting both of our time. And you can get up and leave. That's okay. The other thing is, be your authentic self, right? Like, you don't have to let it all hang out, but they want to see your personality. You want to see if your personality fits with theirs. So don't put on a different persona. Yes, you want to be a little more professional and things like that, but don't change your persona entirely. Like, just be you, be natural, because that's who they're going to get on the day-to-day basis if they hire you.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for jumping in here. Give us some details. How can people find you on social media if they have questions? I know you work for Give WP, so they can find you through Give, of course. But how do they find you on Twitter if they have some questions for you?
Twitter, my handle is WP Jeff B. So WPJEFFB.
Fantastic. So, and I'm sure you're open to questions if people have questions
Definitely.
for you about interviewing and hiring and things like that. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to let you go so you can get to work, because you do work with me and I know how busy we are. Anyway, thanks for being part of the Underrepresented in Tech vlog today. And for everybody else, we'll see you next week.
See.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with a new vlog. Until then, find us on Twitter at UnderReptInTech. Add yourself to or search our free database at underrepresentedintech.com.